Seattle has experienced boom and bust cycles since its founding. Despite the introduction of new elites in each cycle, the power structures have remained the same. A history of exclusionary practices has left marginalized groups suffering from today's affordability crisis, making Seattle unlivable for the city's others.
This is a city as curated by its influencers. A major one of them is Paul Allen, who has managed to foster a unified identity of Seattle through the Seahawks. Through branding efforts alike, Seattle now presents itself as an economically thriving, culturally diverse, and politically progressive city of Pacific Northwest, the city of everything and the city for everyone.
An ocean of cranes dominates Seattle's skyline, building towers that are reshaping the city into a tech powerhouse, but clash with the city's left coast identity as a liberal haven with a young, creative workforce and a deep-rooted culture based in music, coffee, and open-mindedness. Seattle has long been a company town, run by elite members of the corporate world. The city's history is defined by a boom and bust pattern, where great economic prosperity is abruptly followed by decline. Seattle's identity is deeply woven into the cultural institutions of its past. The 1962 World's Fair introduced Seattle to the world, leaving behind the Space Needle and the monorail that would come to define the city's skyline. The 90s saw the rise of grunge music, led by Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Nirvana, promoting Seattle's counterculture on the national scene. The city's strong cultural tradition is now carried on in the social media world by Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson and hip-hop artist Macklemore. The Klondike Gold Rush, World War I and II, Boeing, and the rise of commercial aviation, Microsoft. Each of these sparked boom periods, bringing with them a mass of single, male workers from far and wide. With Amazon's recent rise, Seattle is now booming again at an unprecedented rate. This is the digital gold rush, with programmers replacing the prospectors of 1902, threatening to change the identity so embedded with Seattle's urban and grunge culture. Amazon's move to the city center, an unusual move for an industry traditionally content with large suburban campuses, was the catalyst for the radical changes taking place in Seattle today, bringing life to the South Lake Union area once associated with low-rise warehouses. Amazon's Seattle-based workforce is 25,000 strong, and most have a desire to live close to the office. Development in downtown Seattle is at an all-time high. Amazon's expansion will bring 20,000 more employees to Seattle in the next decade, displacing more of the population. The real problem here is affordability. People are being priced out of their homes. This has led to the gentrification of these neighborhoods, as high-earning tech workers with little investment in the community have come in and reestablished these areas, directly leading to the elimination of decades-old cultural identities across the city. The neighborhoods most affected by Amazon's expansion are the historically African-American Central District, as well as Capitol Hill, home to Seattle's LGBT+ community. What options do these displaced Seattleites have? By being priced out, they are given little choice but to move to the outskirts of the city, while many others have been forced into homelessness, often living together in encampments. Amazon has made strides in taking responsibility for this, working with the city to temporarily open a shelter in one of their abandoned properties. But this solution is only for 1 year, and these newcomers need to continue more community outreach to combat its cultural effect on the city. But most importantly, the city, the businesses, and the elites need to address the affordability problem. The $15 minimum wage and the HALA program are good starts, but are just the beginning. Seattle's identity is at risk here, with so many outsiders threatening to change it. San Francisco has faced similar problems as Seattle. But Seattle has a head start and the necessary time to fix the situation before it becomes too late. There is hope for Seattle's future, as its past has been built on a strong cultural fabric and economic hustle, embodied by the city's early railroad system.
Seattle was part of a transnational railroad network that maintained its power through the vertical integration of the supply chain. As consumers of wood products for railway ties and stations, the resource enabled loggers to penetrate deeper into forests. Along the way, railroad companies would buy up adjacent lands. The network facilitated the import of machinery and laborers from the east, and also allowed for cheaper transport of resources in return. They would profit off of train fares from migrants, to whom they would sell land to this new labor force of miners, loggers, and fishers.
And that was a scene in the US city of Seattle a short time ago. Clashes during May Day protests between what the Seattle Times newspaper are calling anti-capitalist demonstrators as well as police. You can see that tear gas have been fired.
At both state and national level, violence and discriminative laws against racial minorities have existed for a long time. Racial restrictive covenants prohibited minority groups to occupy or own properties in middle and upper class neighborhoods. They were one of the most critical institutionalized discriminatory practices against people of color. Together with redlining, they largely shaped the spatial segregation patterns and undermined the capacity of minority populations to move up the socio-economic ladder.
Redlining was the cousin of racial restrictive covenants. The restrictive covenants excluded minority populations from middle and upper class neighborhoods, which were usually the green and blue areas in the redlining map. Consequently, minority population were contained in the yellow and red areas. Being redlined meant that the chances of obtaining financial service or support in housing were very little, which effectively locked the minority population in some of the worst urban neighborhoods. Yet, this was only one of the many aspects of the discrimination against the minorities. Another example would be the Interstate 5 highway, which significantly disadvantaged the minority populations as it carefully avoided the green and blue areas while running ruthlessly into or along the border of the yellow and red areas.
And I said, why would anyone need open housing in Seattle? Everyone can live every place in Seattle, can't they? And they told us, as a matter of fact, no, of course they can't.
And the real estate people would not show us anything north of the canal. That's true. In 50.
And the soldiers started coming home, then the landlady evicted us from the laundry. The week before, they told us our loan was disapproved.
Early Chinese immigrants arrived in Seattle and served as coolies. The deteriorated environment of the Chinese Quarter resulted in the resentment of whites who expelled the Chinese from the port area. Due to the discriminative laws, the immigrant population grew very slowly before 1930s, and racial minorities finally settled down in the area that we call International District today. The International District is a byproduct of long-term discriminative laws and self-protection mechanism.
Well, Chinatown for a long time was very much self-contained. It was a ghetto in the sense that the people who were Chinese could only live here, A lot of social pressure just kept the Chinese in Chinatown. So everybody who lived here knew everybody else.
My mother, who came from Japan, was able to, she was able to get along just using the Japanese language because all the merchant people, they spoke Japanese. She actually lived here for over 50 years and never knew English.
Segregation and stratification exist not only among races, but also within a racial group. As the diagram shows, there is a relationship between topography and income. Rich people tend to live in central business district, in the waterfront, or on the beautiful hills with a good view of the whole city. An international district is still an area where residents with the lowest income live. Asian Americans usually relocate themselves uphill to the Beacon Hill and the First Hill and escape from the international district after they achieve some measure of economic success.
In 1986, King County officially changed the namesake of the county from William Rufus Devane King, the 13th Vice President of the U.S. and slave owner, to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The enactment of the new logo reflects Seattle's history of progressive liberalism with what is at best a history of racial indifference and at worst racial exclusion. Currently in Seattle, the Black population is experiencing rapid displacement from the Central District, a neighborhood where African Americans were forced to reside in the early 20th century. As the housing market became racially segregated in the 1900s, African Americans settled in the northern portion of the Central District near East Madison and along the southern area of Yesler Way and Jackson Street, and were joined by new residents during the post-World War II Black migration to the city who moved into the Cherry Street area. In the early 1900s, African Americans began moving to the Central District, and by 1960, 78% lived in the same 10 tracts despite an increase in new residents. Carried by the undercurrents of the civil rights movement, the Central District became the core of the movement in Seattle. While the Black community has continued to mobilize and advocate for social, economic, and racial justice, the Central District has lost its cohesion as the African American population has diminished and dispersed. Moreover, the Black population continues to be disenfranchised from economic opportunities as median wages and home ownership rates have decreased in the past decade.
Initially confined to the underground establishments in Pioneer Square, the political activism that took root in the University District attracted the LGBT community to the adjacent neighborhood of Capitol Hill. Since then, Capitol Hill has become the heart of Seattle's LGBT community and home to the city's counterculture. Recent hate crimes and escalating housing prices have placed pressure on the LGBT community, struggling to find safe and affordable homes. Much of the stress in the housing market has been attributed to the influx of the tech leads. The neighborhood's shift to this new demographic can be read in the showrooms of Capitol Hill's new developments, with interior designs targeting a well-traveled intellectual class aspiring to be the next Steve Jobs. The grungy industrial alternative scene of Capitol Hill has been reduced to branding for $2,500 one-bed rental apartments. Studio rents are as high as $1,800. On the other side of the spectrum, the primarily single male millennial tech population has created a demand for microunits, outpacing other US cities in the number of permit-approved units. These microunits are no larger than a parking stall, making them not much bigger than the homeless encampments seen in Nicholsville.
Nicholsville was an authorized homeless encampment in International District next to the I-5, which was cleared by the police earlier this year. The homeless problem in Seattle has become so severe that the city has declared a state of emergency. Yet this is not the first time when Seattle is in such trouble. The Great Depression in the 1930s also resulted in many shantytowns named Hoovervilles in the city. As federal assistance was not offered until after 1933, people evicted from their homes, as well as formerly transient workers, moved into these settlements. Nicholasville, a 21st century Hooverville, operates as a roving tent city comprised of tiny houses, tents and tent platforms for up to 1,000 homeless people, while many more homeless people still live in worse conditions under highways. In the gentrifying Pioneer Square neighborhood west of International District, homeless people has been driven to the border between the two neighborhoods, and also into International District. The Alliance for Pioneer Square has been cleansing and aestheticizing the environment of the neighborhood with a curated cluster of shops and restaurants, as well as street signs to prohibit access of unpleasant people. Homeless people, as the unwanted group, has been pushed not only to the edges of gentrifying neighborhoods, but also into the dumping districts of the city, which are International District and Rainier Valley. Nicholasville was in Central District in 2013 and relocated to International District in 2014 due to development pressure. It was dismantled by the police this March and moved further south to Rainier Valley. Not coincidentally, where the homeless have been exiled to are consistent with spaces inhabited by the others of Seattle.
Another tool that reinforces spatial patterns of exclusion is the creation of preservation and cultural districts. An Arts and Cultural District program was codified in November 2014 to protect Capitol Hill's cultural vibrancy and provide building and preservation incentives. A second cultural district designation of the Central District took place on December 2015, motivated by the Central community and the city's mission to preserve and celebrate the area's African American history. While the city recognizes the African American legacy of the neighborhood, contradictory goals seem in motion as the city has approved several development projects and zoning variances, including upzoning, while declaring the need to preserve the African American community, which has largely been pushed out due to rising rents, home values, and property taxes. In February 2016, Vulcan Real Estate, owned by Paul Allen, acquired its first central property, a 6-acre parcel near 23rd and South Jackson, signaling the immense economic value of the neighborhood and the changes to come.
Not a Burger King burger, this is Sammy's. It's unique to the Central District and to our hood, and it's something that it's just culture, right? It's texture, it's important, and it makes us say this is who we are. Yeah, we're Americans, but we're Seattleites, and that's different